and welcome to the next stage of our Leveling Up project from Open Innovations in conjunction with the Royal Society of Statistics. My name is Paul Connell, and you can tell the Open Innovations team because they've got their lovely backgrounds. Tom Forth is here. He's going to be talking us through the work he's been doing over the last few weeks and months. But also, as people join, we have a sold-out show, so we were up to 100 on the limit of our Zoom account for this stage, but we're not expecting everyone to join. So I think some people dropped off, and some other people managed to get a link this morning. If you've used Zoom before, hopefully you know what's going on. If you'd like to ask a question, please just drop it in the chat and we'll try and pick it up as we go. I'm going to hand over to Tom in about 5 minutes, so about 12:05, where we're going to go through what we've been working on. If there's an appropriate break, we will pick that up and try and pick up questions as we go. Otherwise, we will do them at the end. We have a hub page, so if one of the Open Innovations team can drop it in the chat, and hopefully you've seen it before. On there are all the resources that we've put together. There's a Google Doc where lots of people have joined in and shared information around leveling up and good, useful resources. And then what I'm really happy about is the talks we had right at the start of the project, where we had some of the UK's best thinkers, and also Andy Haldane, who wrote most of the Leveling Up paper, or was responsible for it, working with ministers. And in there, there's the aspects of leveling up I think we've completely covered them. So we've got people who are very interested in places, people who are very interested in people who are very interested in policy, people who are interested in well-being, people who are interested in the economy, all of these parts. We haven't done crime. But those different aspects of what leveling up means, I think is really interesting. And those resources that we have of those talks are a really good starting point for people when they're thinking about leveling up. We are staying on brand and we're sticking with the data. And obviously we want to make sure that other people who join in with this. So whenever people ask us what they think or we try and get them to write down or explain or clearly state in quite clear terms what they mean by a thing, or if they are asking us to review something. So this work that we're doing now is to try and bring people back to facts and data and reproducibility. And so in the Leveling Up paper, there's quite a lot of talk about that. We'll see how that pans out. I know Tom's going to mention the ONS dashboard that's been built. That's great. It gives us all some great baseline infrastructure to start measuring outputs. But also, we shouldn't forget the past and how we've got to where we are. So looking at that, and also looking at great comparators. So the Leveling Up paper was a bit light on comparing us to other similar economies and places that have done well. I won't repeat them all, but we've seen some of the stuff in Northern Europe, some of the stuff in Germany, comparator cities and places in France, and where investments have been made. So I'm not going to start talking about our opinion on the Leveling Up paper, but I think it's a great start. It says it's going to be based on data and it's going to be based on facts, so that gives us a great place to start. So I think we're getting towards 5+12. I'm going to hand over to Tom. So Tom, over to you, and then if you've got questions, please put them in the chat. Have a look at the resources we've already got on the page, and we'll kick off.
Fantastic. So that's me. That's us. I'm going to confusingly switch between things that are in PowerPoint and things that are on the web, and then the key thing is that most of what I'm showing is things that we've built in the last couple of months, and these will be what we stick together to be our useful addition to thinking about leveling up with open data. And as is something somewhat usual to me, I'm going to start with something that we're not going to do. So, and I'll explain why we're not going to do it. So this was a tool that we built about 7 years ago now, and it looked at what is now part of the leveling up thinking around education. And we took every parliamentary constituency in the UK and we just compared its child poverty rate and the university access rate. And we could also look at the higher education access rate with that. And it was very interesting because effectively you saw that child poverty has different impacts in different places on whether young people choose to continue with education at 18. And this was quite a nice example for us because it showed really quite a big variance even within the southeast of England. So in southeast England, child poverty has a really big effect on whether kids choose to continue with education at 18. And in London, it does and has a much smaller effect. So even areas in London with very high child poverty have quite high rates of people continuing education at 18. So the reason that we're not going to do that is because of the ONS dashboard, which Paul mentioned. So I would encourage everybody who doesn't know about it to have a look at the ONS Leveling Up dashboard, which came out at almost exactly the same time as the Leveling Up white paper. That's what it sort of looks like. I've compared here Leeds, Bradford, Harrogate. It's got about 20 measures. It's a fantastic piece of work, really, for looking at a really broad range of measures that we might want to think about being related to leveling up. And that's things from weekly pay to number of people who smoke. So this is just an example for Bradford and Harrogate. What's really quite astonishing here, and if we go back to listen to the talk that we heard from the Government Statistical Service, they did say this. This data has not been easily accessible for the whole of the UK in one place before. So the achievement to get this for the whole of the UK is really quite a big achievement by the ONS. And it covers a huge number of areas that we would probably associate with leveling up, which brings us on to the next thing. So we've not done this work. We've done this work separately from the UK government, writing a white paper on leveling up. But it turns out that we've come to quite similar conclusions. And a few weeks ago, I took the leveling up white paper, well, when it came out, and I saw the missions in it. And I just picked out the 12 missions that the UK government has set itself as targets for leveling up. And I put them on a little graph that said, which ones do I think that they can do something about, and which ones is them measuring success. And I'll just talk through that quickly before I show some of the stuff that we've built. So these are the 12 missions. They start with improved productivity, pay and employment. That's mission 1. They go down to like mission 11, which was crime, and that was quite heavily focused on reducing violent crime, especially among young people. And we split these into things that the government could do. That would be things like the government promises to improve access to broadband and high-speed mobile internet is mission 4. Well, that's pretty easy. Government can just get money and spend money, and you'll have better broadband and better mobile phone reception. There's mission 8, which was all about well-being. And if you want to go back and listen to the fantastic talks, both by Tara Alas at McKinsey and especially by the What Works Centre for well-being, then there's some fantastic ideas on how we measure that. That was mission 8, well-being improved. I think there's some argument that that could be further to the left. There are some things that government can control on well-being. We know that being unemployed makes you quite miserable, so that's a little bit within the government's control in some ways. Certainly we know that things like drugs, alcohol dependency, homelessness, etc., are pretty awful for your well-being, so there's some work to do there. But mostly we figured that well-being improved was something that would be a measure of success of levelling up more than something that the government could directly control. I've put in bold on this chart the missions which are covered in the ONS levelling up dashboard. So mission 1, productivity, pay and jobs, that's like the top 3 things in the ONS dashboard. Public transport has about 3 measures in the ONS levelling up dashboard. It has like distance by public transport, accessibility by public transport, travel time to the nearest major employment centre, but it also has cycling, also has driving. It has some stuff on broadband, it's focused very much on gigabit Ethernet availability. Obviously, we're very proud in Yorkshire that the great city of Kingston upon Hull has the best accessibility to gigabit Ethernet, so that's great. It has quite a lot of stuff on early years education, primary schools, a bit on adult skills, quite a lot on healthy life expectancy, and quite a few measures of well-being in there on the ONS dashboard. So we pretty much said there's no point us repeating this. The ONS have done it. They've done a great job of it. Let's use their tool. They've shared all of their sources. They have a fantastic way of sharing the data. That's great. So what's left then for us to do are some things where we think we can add value. And there are 3 areas that I think are important there. So they are around mission 1, productivity, pay and jobs. I think there was some important missing detail in the ONS levelling up dashboard, but also in the white paper itself on levelling up. In terms of R&D, there's no measurement at all in the ONS levelling up dashboard around R&D, even though this is quite a big part of the levelling up white paper. I should say I've heard from good sources that there wasn't a huge amount of warning for the ONS on what was going to be in the levelling up white paper. It sounds like it was decided quite late exactly what would go in it. So it's no surprise that there's nothing on R&D there, but that's something where we can really contribute. And then the last kind of challenge that we've chosen to pick off is really the huge missing part, I think, of the UK government's levelling up white paper, which is international comparisons. And by that, I mean international comparisons in the present era. There's obviously a huge amount of work on international comparisons 1500 years ago or 500 years ago at various times, but in the present era, there isn't any. So I think those are the 3 areas that we've decided to focus on: productivity, pay and jobs, that's the economy stuff, R&D, and international comparisons. So this is a slide with some real pain on it. Probably many of us will have started seeing and becoming frustrated by maps like the one on the left. So the map on the left is the proportion of scientists and engineers who are women in 2020 by regions of Europe. And of course, none of these maps include the UK anymore, which is providing us with some problems, quite considerable problems, in doing comparisons. So I think most people would say that improving representation of women in science, technology, and engineering, medicine would be something we want to do as part of levelling up. And we no longer have any easy way of doing these international comparisons. And the reason for that is because the UK has decided to leave Eurostat, which is the European Union's statistical agency. They're still in the works, a future collaboration agreement, and the prospects of future collaboration. But at the moment, that's not happening. So we'll start to see ourselves fall off all of these maps. The advice of the Government Statistical Service and the ONS is to switch to using OECD data sources. And one of the things that we found throughout this project is that the OECD data sources are not anywhere near as good for comparability within Europe as the Eurostat data sources. So I've put some quotes there, which I'm not going to read out because it's incredibly detailed around which OECD TL2 and TL3 levels correspond to NUTS 2 and 1 levels in different countries. And effectively, the answer there is they don't align very well and not in a very usable way. So I think the OECD route is where we'll have to go down in terms of international comparisons. But at the moment, it's definitely making our lives harder. So I wanted to go to the OECD data and have a look. And this is looking at mission 1 around the economy and productivity. Because these are the things that we said that we are going to create. So we're going to create some graphs and maps, GVA and GDHI spread by country. This is income and economic strength. We're going to look at R&D as well. And there's some stuff that we explored and couldn't make work. So I wanted to show, first of all, something that we've done quite a lot of work on last few months. We're sharing that back out now with people, and we've already got a few people working on this. This was trying to compare the fiscal transfers, that's the money that's transferred from one region to another in the UK, and trying to do an international comparison about that. And we chose to do an international comparison with Germany because there was data available and also because lots of people were asking about it. And I think we have managed to create for the first time that I've seen a comparable map and comparable graphs of how much money gets transferred effectively from higher taxes in prosperous parts of countries to less prosperous countries, less prosperous parts of the country. So that's something that we are sharing today, and happy to, that will be in all of our write-ups, and we're happy to show it. And this is the same thing on a map, but this is the OECD stuff. So this is what we've actually built. If we look at the OECD in terms of doing international comparisons of what is mission 1 of the UK's Levelling Up White Paper, it looks at strength of the economy, that's GDP per person, and it also looks at income of households. And you don't necessarily have to have a strong economy in a place to have high income. You can achieve high income through regional transfers. And these are the website screenshots that I've taken. I've taken screenshots from the OECD because the site itself is quite unreliable. I certainly wouldn't want to use it for a live demonstration. And what you see there is for the United Kingdom and the United States. I picked them because they're next to each other on the graph, and otherwise you can't get a good comparison. You can't pick which countries you want to look at. That's showing us the strength of the economy in different regions of the United Kingdom and the United States. Effectively, the USA is a stronger economy than the UK almost everywhere. But there are some real challenges with using this data. First of all, the website doesn't work very well. But second of all, we have no real idea what's going on when we look at these graphs. So there are some key problems with these graphs. Each circle in the graph represents a region, but they overlap enormously. So if you look at any of the three graphs with the circles on, you'll see that there's just huge overlap between different regions. So you can't see what's going on. Another problem that we have with this presentation from the OECD is that all of the regions have the same size. So if you look at the United Kingdom, the region with the highest GDP and the highest income is Greater London. and it's also a region with a very high population, but it has the same size blob in these charts as anywhere else. So it has the same size blob on a chart as Wales, which has a far lower population. And we think that this probably matters quite a lot. We want to know actually where people are living, not just the economic strength of regions. So we've done quite a lot of work to try and improve this way of presenting the data, and also to be ready to use different sources, because we think that at the moment, this data sourced from Eurostat is much higher quality, but we know that the OECD data is probably what we will be using going forward. And so we want to be ready to use either one. So I'm actually going to show what we've built, and it's live on the web, so you can use it now if you want. This is the tool that I mentioned first of all around comparing different regions of the UK and how many people progress to university and higher education based on child poverty rate. And that's quite old, but as I say, we're not choosing to update this for our current dashboard because that's already in the ONS leveling up dashboard measures. There's measures of progression to further education, higher education. So this is the tool that we built, which is similar to the OECD way of looking at the strength of economies in different countries. We see, first of all, that it's quite different to the OECD graphs because each one of these blobs, this for example, tells us that London is the most strong economy in the UK. And this tells us that Hamburg is the strongest economy in Germany. And we might look at the weakest economy in the UK, which is Southern Scotland or West Wales. And we can look at any of these places in the UK. And importantly, this visualization that we've developed includes the size and the population of each region. So we can start to see just how big London is compared to northeastern Scotland, which you can't see in the OECD charts of this.
Tom,
so yeah.
Are you showing a visualization? I think you're just sharing the PowerPoint at the moment.
Oh, how interesting. I hope that I was sharing a visualization, but let me go back. My apologies. All this time of that's better, isn't it?
Hugely.
So this is you can see this now. When I was talking about London being the strongest economy, there it is. When I was talking about Paris being the strongest economy in France, there it is. This is Southern Scotland, that's West Wales. And this has quite a few advantages over the OECD visualization because it shows you the population of each region that you're looking at, but it also doesn't overlap the regions. So you get to see them all. They all stack up nicely. What's great about this is it's someone at the ONS who's written this for us. And I think one of the questions that we've had a lot around leveling up is why do we care about this abstract concept of GDP? What is GDP? What does it mean? I don't care about GDP. And I think that's a really good point. So we've also made it so that in the same graph, you can also look at income. So I'll switch to income now. So this is within the same countries, all of the regions again, but now what the income is in each one. And you can just flip between the two, follow the place that you're interested in and understand what happens in terms of the economy creating prosperity. And probably a key thing that people will look at is if you look at London or Paris over here on the right, when we switch from GDP to household income, the household income drops very considerably compared to the strength of the economy. And that's because we run systems where we tax people and we redistribute money to different regions of the country. And people in London, because they tend to have higher wages on average, tend to pay more tax. So their income is considerably reduced compared to the GDP. So we see that here. And these are, I think, improvements over the OECD visualizations of this, and it's all open source. We will be building these both based on NUTS data, that's from Eurostat. This is currently using Eurostat data, but we can also do it for any data source, including DFI. So that's live now on the web. If anybody wants to have a look at it, play with it, it's there. So I still don't think, though, that looking at dots on a map tells us much about regional inequality or the need to level up. We can certainly see that we have areas of the UK with weak economies, just as we have areas of Italy, Sicily, Puglia, Calabria, it's all in the south of Italy, that have very weak economies. And we can also see that we have quite low incomes in certain places in the UK, just as we have low incomes in places in Italy. But I don't think that this visualization, whilst better, actually tells us how well we can expect to do and how well we are doing. For that, I think we need a single number. So we have been developing a single number, and the single number, all of the work on that is shared on GitHub. We try and measure a single number that tells us how regionally unequal we think the economies of countries in Europe are, so that we can measure the UK against them. And we also go back to 2000, so we've got the last 20 years of data to see how that has changed in the UK. So that's on the web as well. And this is effectively just some magical maths, GDP dispersion, which we've written a quite detailed guide on how it works based on this. So I wanted to show the outcomes of that, because we've got this tool that shows you strength of economies by regions, income by regions. And then we have a tool that boils that down into a single number by calculating the dispersion of GDP. And I will show what we've got there. So this is in case that didn't work, but it did work. So we got lucky. It's on the web, ready to play around with now. And I just wanted to say that, you know, when we take the distribution of the UK's regional strength, whether it's in terms of GDP or income, and we calculate the dispersion of it, we get a single number. And I'm going to show some graphs of what those single numbers look like. So that is regional inequality for a few different countries all around the world, and some different like groupings of countries. So they won't like it very much, but I stick Belgium and the Netherlands together, and I stick all the Nordic countries together, because actually they're all very similar. So we stick them together. So what we see is that in terms of inequality of GDP, the UK is one of the most regionally unequal countries in Europe, and indeed in the developed world. I think that this has surprised quite a lot of people that we've spoken to and worked with on it. I think it's still surprising to most Britons when we say that regional inequality in the UK is higher than in the USA. I still find that people don't want to believe that. We're very similar to France when it comes to this, probably because we have a similarly very large and successful capital city and struggling other places. So in the blue, we see that the inequality of our economy is very high. That's in the Levelling Up white paper. But interestingly, there's no suggestion that we measure or track how that changes. So we've built a tool that will let us track and measure how regional inequality of GDP changes over time. And the second bars are regional inequality of income. And when you saw the bubbles move in the previous graph, what you were seeing was countries taxing, redistributing, and sharing out the prosperity that they generate in different regions. And we see some interesting differences between countries here. So the UK is never the most regionally unequal country in my graphs. France is very slightly, I think, more regionally unequal than the UK. And that's when it comes to the GDP figure. And then when it comes to inequality of income, we're actually very slightly less unequal than Italy. And the reason for that is that the Italians and the Spanish don't seem to be a country full of much solidarity. There's not a lot of transfer between regions. Pretty much, if a region has a strong economy, it has high income. If a region has a weak economy, it has low income. The UK is quite a lot more generous than that. We share money around, so we spend it where it's needed on things like the NHS, and we raise it where it's where prosperity exists. And France is really interesting in that because it is a very unequal economy regionally, but actually quite an equal country when it comes to incomes by region. So there's a huge amount of transfer that takes place there. So this is part of what we'll be measuring. And then this is the graph that you can see on the GitHub. This just tracks, this lets us track how the UK is doing when compared to international comparisons on regional inequality. What we see is that it has risen over the last 20 years quite considerably. There is a theory that this is inevitable and it will always rise, regional inequality will always rise, but actually we see that in about half of countries, regional inequality has fallen and continues to fall. So I think that
Tom, we just got a question.
Yeah.
In your income calculation, do you include housing costs?
No, it's a great question. So the reason why, if we look at this chart, the disposable income of London is really very, very high, is because we don't consider housing costs. And there's a big discussion. If we go to the GitHub page, there's a big discussion about whether we should or shouldn't include housing costs and what proportion of housing costs we should include. One of the challenges that we have with looking at that stuff is that we're already struggling to compare internationally, and we effectively have almost no chance of comparing internationally if we include housing costs. The economic case for including or not including housing costs is a little bit challenging as well. But the good news is, if we want to measure and track regional inequality of income, we can calculate it. We've written all of the code so that we can calculate it after housing costs or before housing costs. Completely, we don't mind. So all that we lose if we start looking at including housing costs is international comparison in some ways. So that's the graph of the outcome of this. As I say, I could redo this to be. This is looking at regional inequality of GDP. We could look at regional inequality of income, and and we could do that before and after housing costs. So the next thing that I wanted to show was our work on R&D, because there is no measurement of this. It's one of the top missions in the Levelling Up white paper, but the ONS Levelling Up dashboard doesn't have anything on it. I completely understand why they don't have anything on it. That's because the ONS Levelling Up dashboard works at the local authority level, and we have no data on R&D spending at the local authority level. There is some announcements in the Levelling Up white paper, and the Government Statistical Service and Andy Haldane spoke on the videos that you can go back and watch about exactly this, that they were going to be collecting a lot more data on where R&D was happening. And the reason that we care so much about research and development R&D is that this is creating jobs that create new ideas that improve productivity and wages in businesses and in society. So it's one of the levers that we think we can pull to try and improve incomes and the strength of the economy, and then ultimately through that higher wages and better well-being and things like that. And the pattern that we know exists is what we see on the left. So on the left, I've taken developed world countries and I've split the amount that gets spent on R&D in them by whether it happens by business doing it or whether it happens by government doing it. So government is along the x-axis and business is along the y-axis. And what we see on the left is a really well-known pattern among people working on regional development and economic development more generally, which is that business tends to spend twice as much as government spends in almost every country, or very, very consistently. So government spends £1 or €1 or $1, business tends to spend 2. And the relationship is very, really quite a tight relationship, high correlation between the two spendings. And on the right, I've shown the regions of France. And what we see is that within France, we have quite a high correlation between where business spends money and where the government spends money on R&D. This is something that we've published a lot about before, and there's open source explorers of this data as well. And just to compare now with 2 other countries, this is what Germany looks like, and this is what the UK look like on the same measure. We don't see any correlation at all, to be honest. There's very little correlation between government spending a lot on R&D and business spending a lot on R&D in either country. So both Germany and the UK don't seem to align where government spends on R&D and where business spends on R&D. We've built some tools similarly to explain this stuff. So I'll quickly show where they are. Okay, so we've got these tools here, which you can see where we are. You can see countries, what they spend on R&D, but we can also look within countries and understand where people spend on R&D within each country as well. So this is where that data's come from. We have the ability to explore any country and compare countries. But the key thing that's missing here is one single number. And I think one single number is important. We want to be able to say that the UK has high regional inequality. And we want to know whether that's getting better or worse. And we want to know how it compares with countries around us, because we think that the countries around us are a good way to judge whether we think we can make improvements or not. It would be, we may say that we want to have 0 regional inequality, but if you listen to the talk by Paul Swinney at the Centre for Cities, I think he made a really good point in our introductory talks and sessions that we're never going to achieve a completely regionally equal country, and we shouldn't even be trying to do that. There are some places where at some times in the history of our nation, there will be a stronger economy. So we don't, just because we found oil and gas in the North Sea, doesn't mean that we should be expecting Wales, which is nowhere near the North Sea, to prosper in the same way as we saw prosperity grow in Scotland. So we are always going to have regional inequality of the economy, and we shouldn't worry too much about it. And having international comparisons, I think, is only really possible if we can distill these complex graphs down to one single number. And thankfully, in this case, when we're looking at a scatter chart, we can distill it down to one single number. We draw a straight line on the chart, and we say, we draw a straight line on the chart and we say how well did the two things correlate with each other. So we've done that. These are the charts. So if you look at the world on the left-hand side there, you would get a very high score for correlation between the two variables. And if you look at the chart on the left for Germany, you would get a very low score for correlation between the two variables, because there is none. It's just like throwing paint at the wall. So we've developed that measure as well. So we can get a single measure of public R&D location match to businesses. And what we see from that is that both the UK and Germany do very badly at spending, the government spending money on R&D in the same place as businesses do. And we see that the world and rich countries generally tend to match their business spending and their public spending on R&D pretty well, and that France does very well at aligning where the government spends its money on R&D and where it spends and where businesses spending money. So we've created this single measure. It lets us track over time how well we are doing on that and how things are changing. I think for me, the most interesting result of that is that Germany and the UK have both gone from a tiny bit of spending money on business, spending money on R&D by the government and spending money on R&D by businesses being in the same place, to now having almost no relation. You can almost not predict at all what government will spend on R&D in a place by what business spends. And they've done this for two very different reasons. In Germany, the government is spending a huge amount on R&D in the former East. That is a specific levelling up goal. And in the UK, we're sort of doubling down our spend in the successful areas with strong economies. So that's the Golden Triangle, Oxford, Cambridge, London, and Edinburgh especially. So this is a single number that we think will describe usefully how well the government is doing on R&D mismatch. So the ONS haven't produced a number on levelling up regarding R&D. We've produced a number, and we've got graphs like this for every country in the world, and that will be part of what we use to hold the R&D levelling up plan to account, especially since there isn't one by the ONS. So I wanted to come back to this last thing of what we're going to do, and we've built, as I've showed, we've built all of the tools, and we're now going to stick them together into one place. There's, on the left-hand side, there's graphs and maps. So I've shown GVA and GDHI spread by country. That maybe I labeled them GDP and income spread by country, but that's certainly something that we built because we think that the way that the OECD and Eurostat show their data on regional inequality can be better. They share all of their data under an open license, so we're free to use it. And we've built improved tools to explore regional inequality. So that's GVA and GDHI spread by country. And I think we've also come up with a single number that can summarize all of these questions about inequality. So instead of having big charts and big maps that people really struggle with, I think that we can distill down regional inequality to a single number. We've written up why we think that that number should be dispersion, and we've shown how that's been changing for the last 20 years. So our dashboard will track not only how regional inequality has changed in the last 20 years and compare that between the UK and our neighbours and other developed countries, but we can continue to do that into the future. So the second thing that we've looked at is R&D, because we're aware that the ONS have not looked at R&D so far in their levelling up dashboard, and the measures which the UK government is proposing to use to hold itself to account on that, we don't think are that great, but that's fine. So we will do these R&D scatter plots. We've already built the tool to do that. That shows the private and public split of R&D and tests whether the government is spending in the places where business is spending, because we probably think that research and development spending should in large part be about supporting businesses to grow. And we've also created a new number, which we are calling R&D mismatch. So we want to be able to say that R&D spending in the UK and in Germany is strongly mismatched with business spending. So government spending on R&D in the UK and Germany just doesn't happen in the same places as business spending. That is probably not good for economic development and for leveling up. And we now have a single number that will let us compare that. And there's a third thing, which is things we're not sure we can do yet. So I showed the fiscal transfer maps earlier. One of the things that the government completely dodged, and I don't blame them, is it didn't talk about fiscal transfers at all in the Levelling Up white paper, not really. And they're very hard to measure, but effectively we think that we've developed a way of calculating and comparing fiscal transfers in the UK and in Germany. And we would be very interested to hear from anyone who thinks they can do something similar for any other country. We think we can do it for the USA, but we're not quite sure. But we'd love to know if there's another European country that we can do that. So I will stop there. I will last of all share this tool that we will have on our main website soon. And it's this one here. And this is probably something that we're quite keen to get feedback on, get people using, have people compare whether they think this tool has anything useful above the OECD and Eurostat tools that it takes the data from. I think it does, but I'd be interested to hear what people think. So that's it from me.
Thanks, Tom. I think round of applause from us all. I think it's just worthwhile just saying what this project was about. So when we started the project about 3 months ago, the objective was to, I think, do 3 things. One is to start getting people talking about leveling up, and there's some questions in the chat about what does leveling up mean, and I think it means lots of different things to different people. So we've had people describe that in the talks, so we've got some resources about that, and we're letting it. I think if we get into lots of detail about exactly what leveling up is, we would be there forever. I don't think we'd ever get out of the car park in that. So we've helped with helping people understand what it means to them. The Leveling Up white paper has obviously been published, and that it's tried to describe in its missions what it is. So that helps a little bit. And our objective was to build something, a prototype, test something that would help us understand leveling up a bit more. So I think I would say this, but I think we've got there in that we've got the nuts, we've got the ONS dashboard, which really helps on a number of parts of the measuring leveling up, and people could use that themselves or apply it. And then we're looking to add more insight on top of that where there are some gaps. But the other part of this is also, this is about creating tools and a commons of resources for everyone to use. So if there are other tools that are great and could be applied for different parts of this, please use and share and drop them in the Google Docs. If you've got ideas or thoughts or links that are on the web that we can put on our hub page, please put them there. We're going to be building and adding more to that hub page so that it becomes a resource for other people to use. And you can imagine maybe in 3 or 6 months' time that there may be a repo that we formally create, which other people can contribute to, or we contribute to someone else's repo. So please keep us informed about how this works. And then the last part of it is, if you would like to join in or help us with these prototype visualizations or measuring up in the future, please let us know. I always say this, but we are a self-funding nonprofit that does innovation with data. So if you'd like to work with us or help us find some funding to take this work onto the next stage, that would be fantastic as well. If you work in a government department that's spending money on external consultants, maybe you want to stick something to us and we'll put it together and give you back a set of tools that you can use every day. So on that, are there any questions, or would anyone like to, Has anyone got any passionate points they'd like to make before we finish off? Put your hand up or... okay, so it's 10 to 1. Looks like we're finishing within the hour, Tom.
Oh, Sanjeev.
Oh, Sanjeev, you want to share something with us?
I'm just check. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, excellent. No, I was just to sort of compliment you. There's a lot of good work done there.
Oh, don't do that.
Really.
You'll get another 40.
Yeah. No, it was just a few caveats and just adding information to the debate. I mean, obviously, I work for ONS, and my comments are not representing ONS. They're just sort of help you along the way. I don't want to make it Brexit agenda, but obviously, coming out of the European statistical system has pros, but has a lot of cons in my eyes. The issue you've got with the European countries who are part of the European statistical system, lots of the data is required under statistical regulation to pre-agreed, predetermined definitions and guidelines, all of which, plus many more, help to provide a high degree of comparability. So linking to that to the non-EU, and I think as Tom's alluded quite clearly, those level of comparisons are not quite the same when you look at the OECD and beyond, because the OECD and beyond do not have that same legislation on the statistical requirements. It's more voluntary, it's more guidance and principles, etc. And I'd also be very careful. I always say be very careful and cautious when you get data from non-EU countries like America as well, particularly America. Please understand the basis of the data sets before you make any comparisons. You may need to make some adjustments or allowances, so you're comparing like for like. And quite often, some of the countries are not on the same conventions. So some people are on, let's say, for example, the 1993 SNA, System of National Accounts, and some people are on the 2008. But you need to know what basis, because they do make a big difference to comparisons. On R&D, I think that's a fascinating area, because obviously we have lots of official statistics on R&D expenditure, who's producing it, who owns it, and some of the flows at the national level. But I think Tom's right, at the regional or sub-national level, it becomes much more difficult. But this is an area that has got additional challenges than other areas that you would regionalize, because a lot of the companies are involved, the M&Es, the pharmaceuticals, the oil companies, etc., do a lot of R&D. However, a lot of their production is somewhere else in the world. So they've got these income flows and capital flows that take place. So I think on R&D, there may be a dearth of data, but it's also a lot more conceptual challenge and real world challenge of what's going on. So in the UK, we have some huge amount of expenditure and investment in R&D, but quite often the production is elsewhere. It's a pity that the production, like say 30, 40 years ago, would have been within the UK. There's a big loss to the regions in that context as well. But just a few thoughts there, but this is really good stuff.
Thanks. I mean, on the comparability point, Sanjeev, I remember I was looking at the life expectancy data, because healthy life expectancy is, of course, a really key part of the Levelling Up White Paper's measurability. And I was looking at the OECD data on comparability of healthy life expectancy. And you get very quickly, you get to the huge warning page that just says, you probably you can compare life expectancy within the US if it's monitored by the US. You can compare life expectancy within Europe if it's monitored and reported to the European standards. So please do not. Please ask your locally available university expert in life expectancy before you dare to try and compare the two. And that was quite interesting. I think that's definitely, it's a very interesting point that OECD seems to collate data from different places very well, and Eurostat seems to be a bit more forceful in demanding that it's comparable, but I think also doing the work. I saw a really nice example from Eurostat recently, which was it reports the minimum wage for every country in Europe. That should be easy. And someone got in touch with them from Greece and says, that's not our minimum wage. And Eurostat replied, yes, but in Greece, you pay 14 salaries per year. And I'm there going, what? How do you pay 14 salaries per year? But in Greece, you get You get double pay for 2 of your months in your year, and Eurostat take care of that. So there's someone in some office somewhere who makes it their job to understand 28 countries things. Obviously, the OECD have less capacity to ensure that they make that comparable. I think it's good, important. And on R&D, I would just I completely agree on the challenges of it. I hope there is some interesting announcements in the white paper on certainly the government itself reporting R&D spend much better. Once you get into business, I think it's going to be really, really quite challenging.
Yeah, I just want to leave the offer. If you need any advice, guidance, or anything, you can either come to myself or I can always put you through to the right appropriate people. Thanks.
Fantastic.
That'd be amazing. And I think that's part of what we're trying to do here, is that obviously there is a lot to do and no one organization can do it all. So having people who can jump in, step up, share collectively on these issues, and then there's all the questions of economic geography and what's appropriate will come up again as well. You know, how do you compare? And then there's economic geography versus political geography, and what does that mean? So there's a whole other session around that which we could probably start to look at. So if people would like to just stay in touch with us, following us on the various social channels, you've signed up through Eventbrite, so we'll we've got your you've given us permission hopefully to share back with you an email. So please stay in touch with the project. If you've got ideas about how you would contribute, that would be great. And also, if we've got some people who like Sanjeev now, you're on our list now, Sanjeev. So we'll call we'll call on you when we have specific questions. And I think that sometimes getting it slightly wrong will help us get it more quickly right in the future for everyone. So please do join in, and we will try and make it fun as we go along. So that final thanks to Tom, and I think we're going to have I'm going to have my lunch now. So yeah, thanks very much. Please get in touch. The email's in the chat if you want to do hello@openinnovations.org, and also follow the work as we go along. So thanks very much for contributing.